So today I wanted to revisit an older topic where I asked the question, did Ezra Bridger ever use a forbidden force power? And I think he clearly did. So let's get right into my expanded thoughts on the topic.
Did Ezra ever use a forbidden force power? I think he did. But what was that forbidden force power? Well, I actually think there was more than one. But let's start with the ending of Rebels Season 4. I already mentioned in my review of the finale that I thought Ezra didn't act much like a true Jedi. He basically captured all the Imperial troops in the Imperial complex on Lothal and destroyed them all. That's a lot of death. But I was thinking even more about Ezra's actions at the end of Season 4, and I thought about how the wolves are an important part of the rebel victory on Lothal. Granted, the wolves on Lothal are surely some sort of guardian of the planet, and so Ezra doesn't actually control them through some sort of forbidden force power. If anything, the opposite is true, the wolves use Ezra. But there is an animal that Ezra does use, the Purrgil, or as I like to call them, space whales. The Purrgil are an important part of the victory on Lothal. They destroy a massive fleet of Star Destroyers, and there is simply no reason motivating those Purrgil to destroy this Imperial Navy. Plus, there is no doubt some of the whales are even killed in the attack. And how did these whales know who to attack or what to attack? Was Ezra using some sort of battle meditation to guide the whales? It sure didn't look like he was meditating, but surely Ezra was somehow using his force powers to guide the Purrgil in their destruction. How else would they know they weren't supposed to attack Thrawn's ship? And if Ezra is guiding these whales into combat, then surely the Jedi of old would not permit the use of animals in open conflict. And although it's totally just a theory, I believe that this is Ezra using a forbidden force power. But as I promised, there wasn't just one time that Ezra was using a forbidden force power. I think we will all be able to agree that at the beginning of Season 3, Ezra definitely used a forbidden force power when he mind controlled the Walker Trooper to turn against his Imperial friends and then forced him to commit suicide. Clearly, it is a stronger version of the Jedi mind trick that is used to simply convince or persuade someone. And we know that Ezra was using the Sith holocron to develop dark side powers at this point in the story. So hopefully we can agree that Ezra was using a forbidden force power in this instance. But maybe you're still not convinced. So let's go all the way back to Season 1 when Ezra uses a similar mind-controlling force power to summon a massive Frynok. He again doesn't use a mind trick to persuade, he full-on dominates the animal and forces it to do his bidding.
That said, one of the reasons I wanted to revisit this topic is that I now believe there is a serious difference between what Ezra did with the Purrgil and what he did with the Frynok creature in Season 1. Coming back to the topic, I've changed my mind a great deal about the Purrgil in Season 4. Their attack on the Imperial ships, I believe, is more like the Ewoks' attack on the Imperials during the Return of the Jedi. The Purrgil and Ewoks are part of the natural force, and they attack the Imperials because they threaten nature and life itself on the planet Lothal, or in the case of the Ewoks, the moon of Endor. This is part of that nature versus industry theme that we see throughout Star Wars and even in other great nerdy stories like The Lord of the Rings. So if the Purrgil are simply encouraged by Ezra, then that certainly doesn't seem like a forbidden force power. But what about the Frynok that Ezra uses to attack the Grand Inquisitor in Season 1? Do I still think Ezra was using a forbidden force power then? Well, yes, I do. I haven't changed my mind on that one at all, but I think it's interesting to discuss the difference between the two of these situations. As I've mentioned with the space whales, it seemed like Ezra simply guided them or pointed them in the right direction. But in the case of the massive Frynok, Ezra really dominated its mind and controlled the creature. He didn't just suggest that it should attack the Grand Inquisitor, he made it attack the Grand Inquisitor. And to do so, Ezra taps into the dark side. I suggest this because the dark side always seeks to dominate and control, and that is exactly what Ezra does. He dominates the beast. Not to mention, Kanan's reaction at this point in the story shows us that Ezra had done something wrong. So I think I've presented some convincing evidence that Ezra did use a forbidden force power, but I also wanted to include some of your interesting thoughts on the topics as well. So let's get right into those now. The first of which comes from Mystery, and he states, "That was interesting. Your video made me think that because Ezra and Luke grew up in a time without much guidance, they were much freer to tap into the Force. So technically, it wasn't a forbidden Force power because Kanan, Obi-Wan, and Yoda never told them a rule or reason for not using it. It was like a moral Wild West for Force users after the Jedi Purge. It made me think how many dark side users could be operating in the shadows, not for galactic domination, but just to get rich or manipulate others." And yeah, Mystery, that's really interesting. This is sort of like the Wild West after the Jedi Purge. There isn't a lot of structure, and certainly I think that helps Ezra become something other than just a Jedi tapping into the light side of the Force. He seems to be able to do both. Plus, I just absolutely love your idea here about dark side users that could be operating in the shadows. I think that would be an awesome series of books. Very cool, Mystery. Thank you. Let's move on to I Bing You, and they suggest, "I guess this whole animal connection can be used for good and the bad." And yeah, I think that's what it comes down to, I Bing You, is that a lot of these Force powers can be used by light side or the dark side, but when it comes to the dark side, it's different in the fact that they're dominating or much more controlling. But let's move on to Medieval Man 9. He stated, "I would argue that another time he used a forbidden power was that he destroyed the Jedi Temple on Lothal. He had to use the image of the sun, the physical embodiment of the dark side, to do it. I imagine in order to destroy the temple like he did, he would have had to tap into the dark side. This is probably the reason he collapsed the moment he activated the sun." And that's a great point, as always, Medieval Man 9. Tapping into the dark side of the Force certainly seems to be something that Ezra can do, but this is another example of when he does that and how he's completely exhausted by it. It kind of reminds me of how the Sith, such as Dark Sidious, when they tap into the dark side, it sort of erodes their body and makes them become disfigured. But we also have another great comment from RS. They state, "A few points. First, Ezra was not a student trained in the exact method of the Old Republic Jedi ways. Kanan had not undergone the trials to become a Jedi Knight when he became Ezra's teacher. So both Kanan and Ezra were operating from a, let's say, gray understanding of the Force. Second point, if Ezra's influence of the animals' behavior was forbidden, does that make the Jedi mind trick we see Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Luke using forbidden Force skill as well?" And I think this is a really interesting point that you bring up, RS, and that is, what exactly is a forbidden Force power? And I think a forbidden Force power is basically a Force power that both light side and dark side users use. So in the case of Ezra, his connection with animals, where he can suggest that they do something in a non-dominating way, or he can absolutely control them using the dark side. That, I would say, is the same Force power, but used in two different ways. Likewise, if you're using a mind trick, you could suggest someone do something. I believe that would be the light side use of the mind trick. Or you can use a mind trick where you completely dominate the other person, as we see Ezra do in Season 3 of Star Wars Rebels. Of course, this is all just my opinion and speculation, but it's making sense in my head canon at the moment. But let's move on to another comment here. We have JetBlast190, and he says, "I think Ezra's path is similar to Anakin's in that when we first meet Ezra, he is dealing with the loss of his parents and really doesn't know how to cope, other than by merely surviving. When he meets with the Ghost crew, Kanan in particular, he is given an opportunity to face his loss and do something about it. But early on, Kanan is a reluctant teacher for Ezra, and by his own admission, even his own training is limited. Yoda recognizes the dark side tendencies in Ezra, and the Sith holocron serves as the ultimate test for Ezra. I see Ezra being aligned, similar to the Bendu. He's a light side user but can access the dark side but doesn't succumb to it. While Anakin was a far stronger Force user than Ezra, he succumbed fully to the dark side while Ezra did not. As for Ezra's future, falling to the power of the dark side is still a possibility, but I believe Ezra will remain in the middle, a gray Jedi of sorts." And JetBlast190, I like this idea of Ezra sort of being in the middle like the Bendu. Of course, the term gray Jedi is no longer used in canon, but I totally totally get what you're saying. And it will be really interesting to see how this plays out if we see Ezra in a Thrawn novel or in a Rebel sequel. Are we going to see him continue to struggle with the dark side? I just think there's a lot of potential with this character in the future. That all said, Star Wars fans, please make the Star Wars community a better place and this Star Wars community a better place by sharing your thoughts in the comments. As always, I'm Mike. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.